everybody. Welcome to another episode of Analytics Mindset. This episode is going to be about the MLOps Practitioner Certificate, and it will be around mostly how to develop sustainable workflows in Dataiku. I did find out that the certification is very extensive and it included a lot of things. So we will be talking about quite a bit of them and any tips and recommendations that I may have for you in case you're trying to also take the certification in the future. This is how the certification looks like. As you can see, you have your name and then the MLOps Practitioner Certificate, and it's just here with when it was issued, your certificate, and where you can share it in LinkedIn. That I will do after this video. You can see here is indeed a Q Academy, as most of our previous stuff here, and this is part of a longer path, basically. You start with the co-designer certificate that usually takes around 2 hours, then going to the advanced designer and the ML practitioner. After you finish those two, Dataiku recommends you to go into the MLOps practitioner certificate. That is the one that I just passed. From these three, you can see that the next one will be either the generative AI practitioner certificate or the developer certificate that most likely I will take later on after this one. What is this exam about? This exam will give you 2 hours to complete, and you will need to do multiple choice exams. Something important is that this certification does not require you to actually have hands-on experience with Dataiku. On all the other ones, the course certificate, the advanced designer, etc., you needed to actually build a flow. Part of the actual thing was you need to build this, you need to create this flow. This is the only one so far that I have taken that does not require you to do that. You just go ahead, answer the multiple choice questions, and finish. If you don't have Dataiku, that'll be very good for you. However, it's really meant for you to have experience governing, having a lot of experience into deployment versus the prod environment. When is automation node? How do you govern things, etc. Yeah, you should have experience with Dataiku. If you don't, yeah, unfortunately, certification is not really for you, but you can still give it a try. It's free after all. You just need to create an account in the Dataiku Academy, but I just wouldn't recommend jumping straight into this. You deploy Dataiku projects bundles and API services to production environments for batch and real-time scoring modes. Think about you train your logistic regression model, your random forest, your neural network. How do we get actual records on how the model is performing? Is it performing good? Is it performing bad? Is there any performance degradation? Do we need to retrain the model? All those questions are answered in these contents on machine learning operations. That is the whole name of the abbreviation. You can see here it does include the hands-on assessment. If you don't like the other assessments, this is easier for you, and that is why it takes less time compared to the speaking. If you see here with all certifications, most of the other ones take 60 minutes, 90 to 120. This one is only going to take 60 because it's only a multiple choice exam, while the others you need to do both a multiple choice exam and build a flow and answer questions based on the flow. And that is why you have less time for these two. You want to understand production and machine learning operations concepts, batch deploy and version project, design and deploy real-time API services, and how to monitor projects and using the evaluate recipe and model evaluation store. You have 20 questions, 60 minutes, and you need to pass with an 80% mark or higher. You can attempt this as many times as you want. However, keep in mind that it's still a burdensome certification. I would not recommend you to do it multiple times. And the actual exam is very easy, introduces you to it, it gives you the multiple choice, and then you have a survey and complete the certification. What is the certification about then? The actual MLOps practitioner path is 4 hours. You can see here that it's advanced and that is a full designer, data scientist, ML engineers, an enterprise AI package. You need the enterprise AI package to do a lot of stuff that Dataiku allows you, and that's like the top tier almost for Dataiku. Keep that in mind if you're planning to use any of these in the future. You will need uh, a license that has the enterprise AI package. Here you have what you will be able to go to do, and it's divided into these required courses recommended. They call it recommended. I will say it's just required. And then the additional learning, that is the actual optional, that they recommend you to look into it. There is 4 courses for the certification, that is production concepts, project deployment, API deployment, and production monitoring. And you can see that the only one that is 30 minutes is production concepts, all the other ones are 75 minutes. My experience is it does have a ton of content, especially production monitoring and API deployment, while the additional learning was a little bit less burdensome this time around, and I did it just because of the learning, and I'm also doing some governing outside of Dataiku. It was a good way to kick 2 birds with one stone. The first part is production concepts. This is the definition, challenges, and principles of MLOps, and I will just go really quickly into this because it really helps you to actually work into it. As AI expands, you have more machine learning algorithms. That's what ML stands for, machine learning. And you need to make sure that deployment models are well maintained and they are not a liability. If your model is actually worse than a regular random chance, then there is no reason why to do it. It's literally just hurting your business. You need to streamline the machine learning lifecycle process. It started as a branch of DevOps, but more and more it's being separated as its own thing. DevOps is a very, very popular software engineering framework. If you're not familiar with it, I strongly recommend you to at least see a very high summary of DevOps. It's really going to make your life way easier once you start looking into actual MLOps. And there is also quite a bit of overlap. Even though Dataiku separates it because it says that it's different, it's an AI platform, etc., they are awfully similar, and you can actually also just Dataiku was born as an ETL tool. Yes, you can add as much AI as you want, but at the end of the day, Dataiku small core performance is you're moving data from this side to the other side and doing something to that data. And you can see here that standard software can run in production for quite a bit without requiring an update, but you cannot do that in a machine learning model because the model can become worse and worse with time goes. MLOps assumes that you need to monitor more closely a machine learning model compared to a regular DevOps model. You want to break down team silos, have everybody on the same page, and having everybody doing the same thing, and automation, a lot of automation to monitor your project. And you want to manage data. That is the big key differentiator. You need to manage the data that you're using to train the model, to evaluate the model, to govern the model, etc. And I won't go into the rest because there is a lot that you can go in. But as you can see, there's 6 components for MLOps. It goes into each one of them. Dataiku goes into the model packing for deployment, how patches work, how bundles work, can you actually push stuff to prod, all of that. What Dataiku architecture is there specifically for MLOps, and finally govern for MLOps. You have a checkpoint that I really encourage you to take because it's going to really help understanding and solidifying your own how much you understand the material and everything there. Here is a quick summary of it. Again, not really. It's basically the same thing. It is recommended. It may take us to 30 minutes, and you need to have 75 to pass on the checkpoint. The next one is project deployment. This is longer. That was the shortest of all of them. You go into data pipeline optimization. How do you document workflows? Dataiku has a ton of documentation options where they expect you to, and this is a big difference. It is a big part of what Dataiku recommends you to do, not very different than what Google, um, Azure, AWS, Google Cloud Platform will ask you to do versus what your company will actually do. Dataiku would prefer you to have your documentation, a wiki, internal wiki with Dataiku, but most likely you may not use that because your company or organization has a dedicated wiki or any other platform that works as a wiki. That's a consideration there. It goes into batch deployment. How do you do batch deployment? How do you create a bundle and publish it? We already talked about that. How do you create and manage deployments? How do you monitor it? And how do you version it? DirectQ has a strong integration with Git, and that's pretty good because it allows you to actually go back. If anything goes bad, the previous version is just one click away. It is not that hard, and that can get very handy if you think about it. And then you have your checkpoint, as I said before. Then there is a little survey and the course completion. This is very long. It has a ton of videos. I'll say that. It really focuses on the moving from a development to a production environment. What considerations do you need to have in production? Why does production exist in the first place? And how do you prepare a project to deploy on production? And you will also learn how to build scenarios and monitor the projects running the automation node. You can see here 75, exactly the same 75 to pass. Now, the next one will be API deployment. API deployment is a little bit different. If you are familiar with software development, especially real-time API transmission, this is going to be a piece of cake. I was not. This was actually something that I really needed to refresh myself about. It goes into real-time APIs, and the main use of a real-time API is when you do batch processing, you kind of get a snapshot of what the model did. You're saying, hey, I got all this data, and this is the actual correct result. Compare it to me, tell me if my model is degrading, etc. API can use real-time scoring. You can score things as they go through, and that has both its disadvantages and advantages. Different scenarios is becoming more popular. Think about as a website, for example, you would like to go the API deployment there because of all the telemetry and all those other things. You can enrich an API query, you can deploy it, then you can also deploy a real-time API service. APIs do require you quite a bit more overhead though. And you will also need to learn how to do a lookup endpoint on API services. And you can, as we mentioned before in the project, you can have multiple versions of the same API service. That will be versioning. It will help you to implement the A/B testing and challenger and champion frameworks for improve the metrics as well. Our next one is production monitoring. This is very long, as you can see, it's 29 lessons, and a lot of them are videos. You can see how you have unified monitoring, how do you govern a process in MLOps, how do you do a model comparison, how do you evaluate the model evaluation stores, that is very important, it gets asked quite a bit, and how do you actually monitor the drift on performance there. You will get introduced to model evaluation stores, how do you conduct drift analysis, and how do you run the model evaluations. There is a lot of ways you can do monitoring pipeline for also, and how do you can create monitoring assets as well. You have API endpoint monitoring. We already talked a little bit about that. And then there's two optional sections that I really found very useful. The production deployment automation. How do you automate all of these things? Because nobody wants to do all this monitoring by themselves manually every single time. It would be a headache. It would be full of all over the place of a lot of things. You want to plan for that. You want to be able to do this without any human intervention, or minimal actually. You will need some human intervention, especially when things don't go as expected. But it will be a lot less than if you just do it from scratch. And then you will have monitoring. How do you do the batch workflow? How do you set up the API endpoint? And how do you export a Python and Java models? And how do you score them? That's a whole different environment. And again, it's a very long part of this course. And you will build onto the two courses actually. There is also a lot of optional documentations you can see. You can go into the data quality and automation course. I did not take this because I already knew from the advanced designer, but if you're not familiar with it, you may need to go into that. And you can see here project deployer and API deployment courses are part of this path too. That is big overlap. There is no worries there. And you can see here a lot of process governance is the focus here. What do you do between the ground truth and input monitoring? How do you use the model comparison? And how do you help? How do you use Dataiku to help you with all of these issues here? And as I mentioned before, 75. And you should have these three. That's why they put it there to understand this course fully. Dataiku Govern and Advanced Govern. These two are very similar. Advanced Govern has the second part, more than a third. The first one is bigger. The second one is way smaller than the first one. The Govern node in Dataiku, it gives you a lot of detail into what you can do. You can create your own nodes in the Govern view if you have permission. You can surface data, you can create your own projects, you can govern items, you can create rules to govern those items, you can go into the sign-off process, you can request feedback. Think all about governance. This course is designated to citing Dataiku, introduce you to this governance framework and how you can do all of the governance in Dataiku, like putting items in registries, organizing work, and you can put business initiatives by linking things together. You can put things from an end-to-end governance lifecycle, from exploring things to actual deployment. Notice that this is just an additional one and you do not need to get to the other certifications. This is just optional. But I still felt that there were some questions in theory there in the actual certification. Not anything fancy though. The advanced Dataiku govern is the last third. Again, it's not as extensive as the first one. You will get into blueprints. How do you design a view into the blueprint version? How do you get sign off for a workload step from operations? How can you create your custom pages? How can you add columns to an item table? And how you can change its layout. Finally, you can use scale analytics and the AI projects and keep everything aligned. A big chunk of governance, in this case at least, is to keep the company's policies and the project's compliance to those company's policies. As automated as it can be, you will need to still update it. If the policy changes, you're going to need to change the governance in order to make it compliant with the policy. You can create new blueprint versions. You can also create new pages and the governance instance as well. And that is all. My recommendation again is if you are thinking about taking these certifications, first you will need for sure to at least understand the code designer. Advanced designer and ML, it's very, very, I would say it's a good foundation to have, especially because I took all of them relatively sooner. Yeah, I took them close enough together that I was able to take the two of them first and then this one. It was easy for me to transition to this one. But if you have less experience with Dataiku or ETL processes, it may take some more time. If you come from more software engineering, web development work, this is also going to be easier for you because out of these things are done elsewhere too. But yeah, as I mentioned before, let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. And as always, I appreciate any feedback that you may have. And yeah, thank you.